Welcome to Life Stories, where the woman who built a $1 million company was nearly erased from its history by the man she gave up everything for. She paid the rent, she paid the bills, she bought the laptop he used to build his empire. And when success finally came, he stood in court and told the world she never had a real job. But what he didn't know, what no one expected, was that she had one final card left to play. A quiet signature made in Paris, a promise tucked away for years. And when she stood up in that courtroom, everything changed. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about rediscovery. It's about voice. It's about power. Stay with us, because what happens next will break your heart and put it back together again. Let's begin. Claire Mitchell didn't look like a woman unraveling. From the outside, she seemed poised, coffee in hand, blazer crisp, posture practiced to suggest confidence in boardrooms that no longer remembered her name. But beneath the surface, something simmered. She hadn't been sleeping well, not since the documents arrived. Thick, impersonal, and humiliating. A courier had delivered them at 6:45 a.m. while she was tying her apron before a shift at the diner. She'd known it was coming. What she hadn't expected was the casual cruelty of the cover letter, the way her name was misspelled, or the one-line justification at the top of page 2. Irreconcilable differences. That morning, as Manhattan woke up around her in a chaos of taxis, sirens, and espresso shots, Claire sat on the fire escape of her fourth-floor walk-up and stared down at the prenup she hadn't looked at in 7 years. She could still hear Evan's voice from that night in Paris, slurred from champagne, smiling too wide, calling it just a silly formality. She'd handed him the pen, her heart torn between devotion and quiet desperation. He'd signed it without reading a single clause. Now she wondered if it had been cowardice or foresight that made her draft it at all. Back then, she'd been a rising star, 28, brilliant, well-dressed, and just promoted to executive track at Eastgate Financial. Her mentors called her sharp. Her father called her stubborn. Her college professors whispered she could be CFO by 40. And then came Evan Blake, wide-eyed, magnetic, and unapologetically broke. They met at a rooftop party in Brooklyn, where he'd stood with a solo cup in one hand and a laptop in the other, showing off his prototype for an inventory system he claimed would revolutionize small business logistics. It was messy, half-baked, not even secured properly, but Evan made it sound like magic. "I just need someone to believe in this," he told her, eyes burning with sleepless energy. Claire, foolish and fascinated, had wanted to be that someone. She bought him a new laptop when his crashed, covered rent, then his car, then his health insurance, and somewhere along the way, she gave him her future. She turned down a promotion that would have taken her to London. "We're building something bigger," he said, pulling her into a kiss that felt like a promise. Claire believed him, until, slowly, she didn't. It was subtle at first, the shift in tone, the silences. The assistant he hired, Savannah, who wore high-waisted pantsuits and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The way Deborah Blake, Evan's polished and passive-aggressive mother, started showing up to meetings. "Claire's more of a behind-the-scenes kind of girl," Deborah would say, sipping imported tea from a bone china cup Claire had bought on sale. Even as Blake Logic Solutions grew, scaling from their tiny shared apartment to glass-walled offices in Soho, Claire continued to work double shifts. Evan insisted the company wasn't ready to pay her. "Reinvesting is crucial," he'd argue while adjusting the luxury watch she couldn't afford. She didn't even notice she was disappearing until the launch party. She brought homemade hors d'oeuvres in a dress that was 3 years old. Savannah wore Ferragamo heels and stood beside Evan in every photograph. Claire's name wasn't mentioned once in the speeches. Someone introduced her as Evan's wife, I think? That night, Claire stood alone at the bar, watching her husband laugh with investors who assumed she was a caterer. And as her reflection shimmered in the champagne glass, she realized she wasn't just being erased, she was being replaced. The prenup became more than a document. It became a lifeline, a question, a challenge. Did Evan remember signing it? Would he even recognize what she'd become, what she'd given up? Claire didn't want revenge. She wanted recognition. She wanted 7 years of unpaid labor, emotional labor, invisible labor. Counted. Which is why 3 weeks after the divorce papers arrived, she walked into the law office of Marilyn Chin. The building was old, nestled between a dog daycare and a dry cleaner. Nothing fancy. But the moment Marilyn looked up from her legal pad and met Claire's eyes, the air shifted. "Tell me everything," Marilyn said, tapping her pen once. "Don't leave anything out." And Claire did. For 3 hours, she told the truth. Not the curated version, not the humble, palatable version she'd practiced for years. The truth. About ramen dinners and the time she sold her watch so Evan could pay a developer. About the anniversary he missed because of last-minute investors. About the lease for a downtown apartment she discovered minimized on his laptop screen. Marilyn said nothing for a while. Then she leaned back and whispered, "He thinks he owns the story, but he forgot you wrote half of it." Claire didn't cry that day. She went home, dug out the envelope, reread the document line by line. Sweat equity, acknowledged financial contributions, 51% to 49. His name signed at the bottom in black ink and blissful ignorance. She knew what came next wouldn't be easy, but Claire Mitchell wasn't here to be quiet anymore. Would you risk everything for someone who forgets you once they succeed? Have you ever realized too late that you were the backbone of a story that erased you? Claire was done being invisible, and the courtroom hadn't even opened its doors yet. Claire hadn't expected the courtroom to feel so cold. The walls were off-white and indifferent, the fluorescent lights humming above like an old refrigerator. She sat at the plaintiff's table in a charcoal suit that didn't quite fit anymore, her hands folded neatly, too tightly in her lap. Across the aisle sat Evan, tailored, polished, flanked by 3 attorneys in matching dark suits. He didn't look at her. He hadn't looked at her in weeks. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Claire felt the floor shift beneath her, like a dock rising and falling with the tide. She'd spent months preparing for this moment. But nothing could prepare her for the way Evan smiled when his lead attorney stood and said, "Your Honor, this is a simple matter. My client's generosity has been consistent. We are here only because Mrs. Mitchell is asking for more than what is fair." Claire's stomach turned at the word. More than what is fair. They didn't see her years of night shifts, the ramen dinners, the missed funerals and holidays and birthdays. They saw a woman trying to take what wasn't hers, a shadow of a man's success. Marilyn leaned toward her and whispered, "Don't flinch. Not even once." Claire didn't. Not when Evan took the stand and spoke about sacrifice, his sacrifice. Not when he said she hadn't been involved in the business, that she had her own things. Not even when he shrugged and said, Claire's jobs were more about survival, not strategy. She wasn't part of the vision. Each sentence chipped at her ribs. By the time the court broke for recess, she felt hollow. In the hallway outside, Claire stared out the window at the street below. A delivery truck passed. A man sold hot dogs on the corner. Life didn't care who was losing in court today. "You okay?" Marilyn asked, joining her with a cup of lukewarm coffee. "No," Claire replied, her voice calm, "but I'm ready." Inside, the second half of the day unfolded like a scene she'd seen in nightmares. Evan's mother, Deborah, testifying with delicate precision about Claire's lack of professional ambition and how some people are better suited for support roles. Savannah, the assistant, gave rehearsed statements about Evan's leadership and how Claire was never part of meetings, never included in strategic decisions. Claire sat still. She wanted to scream. Instead, she breathed. Then the judge called her name. Claire stood, walked slowly to the stand, and looked straight at the man who had once kissed her like she was the axis of his world. "I worked 3 jobs," she began, her voice low but steady. "Not because I lacked ambition, but because someone had to pay the rent while Evan focused. I bought the first laptop. I paid for the first server space. I drove for Uber so we could keep the lights on while he pitched ideas in cafes." A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. "I believed in him," she continued. "But what I didn't know is that believing in someone doesn't mean they'll remember who held the rope when they climbed. She paused. Marilyn nodded. I'd like to submit a document, Your Honor, she said. A murmur rippled through the room. Marilyn stood and approached the bench, sliding the envelope across with practiced grace. A prenuptial agreement? She said. Signed in Paris, notarized 7 years ago. Evan's entire body stiffened. His attorney whispered something urgently into his ear. The judge read. Silence stretched like glass. It outlines my client's financial contributions to Blake Logic during its formation, Marilyn added. It designates her as 49% owner. Evan stood. That document, she tricked me into signing that. I was drunk. It was Paris. We were in love. Claire turned to him for the first time. You were sober enough to meet with investors the next morning, she said quietly. You made 3 deals that week, but I guess my paperwork didn't matter because I wasn't in a suit. The courtroom was still. The judge, eyes unreadable, looked at Evan. Do you deny that this is your signature? He faltered. I don't remember signing it knowingly. The judge set the paper down, then we'll proceed with verification, but unless proven otherwise, the agreement stands. The recess was called. Claire stepped out into the hallway and exhaled so deeply it felt like shedding a second skin. Marilyn didn't speak, just placed a hand on her shoulder. The hallway buzzed with murmurs now. Not about Evan, about her. Claire went into the women's restroom and locked herself in a stall. She pressed her forehead against the cold metal and closed her eyes. That's when it hit her. This wasn't just about a prenup, or a court ruling, or even ownership. It was about identity. She had lived for years as someone else's extension. Now she was burning the costume. She splashed her face with water and caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Tired, pale, but no longer small. Back in the courtroom, Evan's lawyer tried to challenge the document, but every argument fell flat. The notary in Paris, the dated receipts from Claire's payments toward business expenses, the email exchanges where Evan had thanked her for being my co-founder in every but title. They had buried her. She had receipts. By the end of the day, Evan looked less like a visionary and more like a man caught rewriting history. As they exited the courthouse, Evan approached her for the first time in weeks. His face was flushed with frustration. You've made your point, he said, but this will destroy what we built. Claire looked him in the eye. You destroyed it the moment you erased me from the story. He hesitated. You'll get your share. You don't have to keep pushing. She smiled. A real one this time, even if it stung a little. I'm not pushing for more. I'm standing for what was already mine. Then she turned and walked down the courthouse steps. She didn't look back. Have you ever had to fight just to be seen by someone who once claimed to love you? The courtroom was only the beginning. What came next would redefine not just Claire's future, but who she was allowed to become. Don't miss what happens in part 3. The apartment felt emptier than Claire remembered. The couch sagged in the middle, the thrift store bookshelf leaned slightly to the left, and the walls were still lined with picture hooks that once held the photographs of 2 people who had believed in the same dream. Now only Claire remained. She stood in the kitchen with the prenup in one hand and a mug of stale coffee in the other. The case had ended. The judgment was final. Claire Mitchell owned 49% of Blake Logic Solutions. It was written, notarized, and court-enforced. But legal victories don't mend invisible wounds. They don't restore time, or love, or the version of herself she once believed would be enough. A buyout was inevitable. Evan had made that clear through his lawyers, amicably, of course. Claire had agreed. Not out of spite, but out of survival. Staying in business with him would have meant tethering herself forever to a legacy that had already cut her out once. The check arrived in the mail 8 weeks later, enough to pay off every credit card, every borrowed favor, every dream she'd deferred. But it wasn't the money that brought her to tears. It was the letter enclosed. Claire, I know it's too late for apologies that matter, but I do remember all of it. The laptop, the night shifts, the ramen. You believed when no one else did, and I'm sorry for making you feel small in a story you helped build. Do something amazing with this, the way you always could. She read it twice, then folded it and placed it in the back of the financial textbook where she had once hidden the prenup. Not out of sentimentality, but to remember what it had cost. 6 months later, Claire opened the doors of Mitchell & Co. Financial Advising. No polished skyscraper lobby. No glass elevator or espresso bar in the corner. Just a modest office with soft lighting, 2 desks, and a small team of women, each of whom had been overlooked, underestimated, or erased somewhere along the way. Her first client? A single mom launching a wellness brand out of her garage. Her second? A first-generation college graduate trying to scale her food truck into a restaurant. Claire poured into them everything she had once poured into Evan. Strategy, grit, faith. But this time, she kept receipts. She had coffee with Marilyn once a month. Not as client and counsel anymore, but as women who understood the power of being heard. Sometimes they talked about Evan. Most times, they didn't. Claire didn't follow his progress after the buyout. She didn't need to. She had her own. In her office, tucked between case files and budgeting reports, sat a framed quote, "A woman is not a footnote in someone else's chapter." Underneath it was a photo, Claire standing beside her first 3 clients, laughing in the sunlight. One rainy Thursday in November, Claire received a package. No return address. Inside was a copy of Forbes magazine. She flipped to the dog-eared page. 10 founders who changed the narrative. There she was, Claire Mitchell, former shadow, now spotlight. The feature told her story, not just of the courtroom, but of the years before. The ramen, the Uber rides, the sacrifice. The truth. She didn't cry, but she did breathe a little deeper. That night she walked to the waterfront alone. The air was crisp. The sky over Brooklyn was bruised with clouds, and the bridge glowed like a silent cathedral behind her. Claire leaned on the railing and whispered to the version of herself that had once sat in court, trembling and small. We made it. Not out of the fire, but through it. And maybe that was the whole point. Not to escape heartbreak. Not to undo the betrayal, but to survive it, walk through it, and come out the other side, not just with scars, but with strength. A phone buzzed in her coat pocket. It was Savannah. Not the assistant who once ignored her, but a former assistant who had recently been let go from Blake Logic. Her message was brief. I saw the article. Congratulations. You were never invisible to me. I just didn't know how to stand up back then. I do now. If you're hiring... Claire stared at the message for a long moment. Then she smiled, turned back to the city, and whispered, "Let's rewrite everything." What did this story make you feel? Have you ever been underestimated in your own life? Comment 100 if this story moved you. Where are you watching from? Share this story with a friend who needs to hear it. And thank you for being here with us at Life Stories.